Week 17 of the fantasy football season, and with the championship here in most fantasy leagues, here's wide receiver start sits every matchup this week. Christmas game, Kansas City Chiefs at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Xavier Worthy, DeAndre Hopkins, Hollywood Brown, or flex options. Just inconsistent wide receivers all season long, except obviously Hollywood Brown, where he finally returned to the lineup last weekend at the middle of the pack ball game. So this is a tougher matchup versus one of the better defenses in the league in the Pittsburgh Steelers. And this Chief offense has just been a weird year. A lot of scoring has gone with the tight end position in Travis Kelce, Noah Gray, and even Kareem Hunt going back weeks ago. So I know Worthy came off a big game last week, but he's tough to trust week in and week out. And just all these wide receivers are, even though I know their quarterback is Patrick Mahomes. So they all flex options. George Pickens, he's a start if he plays. He's missed the last few weeks now with a hamstring injury, and they need him back in the lineup, rightfully so, is Pittsburgh Steelers. They don't have a true number one wideout in there since he's been out of the lineup. And this week, if he returns, even in a tougher matchup versus the Chiefs, I would give him a start. Him and Russell Wilson have a good rapport. And Calvin Austin, Mike Williams, haven't seen much out of them. I know Calvin Austin, he's had a couple good games here and there, but in a championship matchup, you're not going to have obviously confidence in Calvin Austin. He's a sit in Mike Williams since the trade to Pittsburgh. One big moment he's had, and besides that, we haven't seen much. Baltimore Ravens at the Texans. Zay Flowers is a start. I know his numbers have gone down over the last few weeks for this Baltimore Raven team, but I still believe he's the number one option in this passing game is Zay Flowers. So this week with a beatable matchup of a secondary of the Texans, that just isn't that good. He's a start. Rashad Bateman, a sit for me in this ball game. Bateman, he's been a deep ball threat and nothing, and he's had a couple pop weeks, no doubt about it, for this Baltimore Raven team. But this week, I believe Rashad Bateman, you can't trust him in a championship game. Like I said, his numbers have been inconsistent, no doubt about it. He's a big threat wide receiver down the field, but this week, he's a sit. Nico Collins, he's locked in as a start each and every week for this Houston Texan team. One of the best wide receivers in all fantasy football. And now with Tank Dell out for the season, I believe that's even more targets going the way of Nico Collins. So he's a start, obviously, each and every week. Robert Woods, Deontay Johnson, newly signed, and Xavier Hutchinson all sits. Robert Woods, he's going to get some more playing time. Obviously, he's been with this Texan team since last season, but his best days are behind him, and even last season when he started off the year as a starting wide receiver, he didn't put up money numbers. So Robert Woods, like I said, he don't have much appeal. He don't have a high ceiling. He's a sit. Deontay Johnson, I know it's versus former team, and there's definitely some anger from Deontay Johnson where he got traded to Baltimore and they just didn't use him. So whatever the case may be, I just don't believe we're going to see enough of Deontay Johnson in this ball game. He's not picked up on the playbook, obviously, just getting traded there. Today was Deontay Johnson. So right now, even in a matchup versus former team where he wants to stick it to them for not using him, Deontay Johnson as a sit this week. Xavier Hutchinson, a sit. He had some opportunities early in the year when both Diggs and Dell were out, but Xavier Hutchinson didn't make the most of his opportunities. So this week, in a matchup versus Baltimore, if anyone's going to benefit from the Tank Dell injury, I believe it's Nico Collins. His numbers going up a little bit more, and Dalton Schultz as well. So this week, all three wide receivers are sit. Seattle Seahawks at the Chicago Bears. Jackson Smith-Njigba, what a season it's been for him, and he's easily the number one option in the passing game for the Seattle Seahawks team. So weekly, it's either he's finding the end zone or putting up 100 yards. He's a must start. DK Metcalf, a flex option. He finally found the end zone last week, where he didn't find the end zone for almost 2 months. Seattle Seahawks, but he's just not 100% coming off that hamstring and the injury over the last few weeks. And I'll give it to DK Metcalf. He's a tough guy, no doubt about it. But like I said, he hasn't been 100%, and he's not putting up a lot of points of late. So at best, he's a flex option. DJ Moore, Keenan Allen starts. DJ Moore, it's been a decent season for him. I know last year was a better year with Justin Fields at quarterback, but he still goes out there anywhere from 12, 15 fantasy points in PPR weekly with an occasional big game. So this week in a matchup versus Seahawks where they could be trailing and chasing points, he's a starting. Keenan Allen the last 2 weeks, 2 monster games for Keenan Allen, especially last week. He went over 140 yards and found the end zone in that ball game. So Keenan Allen, he's making plays. And him and Caleb Williams, they're on the same page. And there's a lot of games they're trailing, and he's getting fantasy points and garbage time and catch-up play. Rome Odunze, he's a sit. It's been an up-and-down season for the rookie this year. And I think next season this Bear offense will be a little bit better. Rome Odunze, big wide receiver. He could run the routes. He could make the plays. He was a 10th pick overall for a reason in the NFL draft. But this week with guys like DJ Moore and Keenan Allen, it's tough to trust him in this one, where those guys are ahead of him in the pecking order. Los Angeles Chargers at the Patriots. Ladd McConkey a start, easily the number one wide receiver on this Los Angeles Charger roster. So he goes out there, he runs all the routes, he makes the plays, good yard after catch guy, and he reminds me of a mini Cooper Kupp I mentioned a lot in my videos. So this week he's an easy start. Quentin Johnson, Joshua Palmer, consistency just hasn't been there all season long. I know Johnson early in the year, he was a touchdown playmaker for this Charger team, but of late he hasn't done much and he's been banged up on and off and a lot of drop problems. Let's see, Joshua Palmer, third wide receiver in this offense. The volume hasn't been there, the targets haven't been there. Even in a good matchup, he's a sit. Mario Douglas, Keyshawn Bote, both found the end zone in last week's game. But this New England Patriot offense has just been inconsistent all season long. I know Drake May, he definitely has a bright future, I believe. He could run the football, he can make plays, he's got a good arm, and they definitely drafted a good quarterback. But this week versus the Chargers, I can't trust these wide receivers. Denver Broncos at the Cincinnati Bengals, Cortland Sutton a start. I know the numbers have dropped off over the last couple of weeks with a lot of double teams, and they're forcing Bo Nix to hit other weapons in the offense, like at Devon Vele, Adam Trotman at the tight end position, or one of his running backs out of the backfield. But Sutton in a great matchup at Cincinnati, where their defense has been one of the worst units all season long. He's a start. Devon Vele, he's had a couple decent moments this season, including 3 games in a row earlier in the year where he had double-digit fantasy points in PPR leagues. And last week he did find the end zone, but the targets still aren't there. The consistency still isn't there, and this week, even in a good matchup, it's tough to trust Vele. Obviously, in a championship game, Jamar Chase, best receiver easily in fantasy football this season. He's a must-start. T. Higgins, in the games he's played this season, more times than not, he's found the end zone or had a good ball game. So this week, both these wide receivers, even in a tougher matchup versus one of the better defenses in the league, starts. Cardinals at the Rams, Marvin Harrison Jr., Michael Wilson is sits. Marvin Harrison, it's been a bad year for him for the most part in his rookie season, and that goes on Kyler Murray as well, where he's just inconsistent getting the football down the field. He's not making the big plays as Kyler Murray, a lot of dump-offs or a lot of looking to run. And Marvin Harrison, the last few weeks, he's been a non-factor in fantasy football. He's a sit. And Michael Wilson, he's had a couple pop games here and there, but not someone you're going to trust this year. Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, locked in weekly as starts. Puka Nacua, I think, is the number one wide receiver over here for this Los Angeles Ram team, where weekly it's either 100 yards or at least anywhere from 10, 15 fantasy points is his floor. Cooper Kupp, the last 2 weeks, it's been bad games. A couple weeks ago, he had the goose egg, was Cooper Kupp. And then last week, he only had 5.40 fantasy points at the New York Jets. But I still have confidence in Cooper Kupp. They're back home is Los Angeles. And this is a great matchup versus a middle-of-the-pack to poor Cardinal defense, where he's had a good track record throughout his NFL career. The Panthers at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Adam Thielen, easily the number one wide receiver on this Panther team. He's a must-start. Weekly, it seems like he's finding the end zone, or at least getting anywhere from 12, 14 fantasy points in PPR weeks. So this week versus a bad defense in the secondary at Tampa Bay, a must-start. Jalen Coker, David Moore, I say it's just not enough targets, not enough volume week in and week out. I know Xavier Legette most likely not going to play in this game, but like I said, Jalen Coker and Moore, not making the plays and not putting up the numbers. Easy sits. Mike Evans, he's a start each and every week. Him and Baker Mayfield, they've been locked in all season long. And Mike Evans, he's got a great track record versus the Carolina Panthers. Obviously, being with this Buck team for 10 seasons and versing this Panther team twice a year, I think he goes out there and has one of his better games of the year. Jerry McMillan, he's a flex option. The last 3 weeks, he's got 4 touchdowns, and easily the number 2 target now in the passing game is Jerry McMillan, Tampa Bay Buck team. So this week, I think he goes out there, and he's a decent option, but I wouldn't 100% have a lot of confidence as a must-start because he's due for a down game. New York Jets at the Buffalo Bills. Devontae Adams, Garrett Wilson starts in this game. This could be this could be a game where the Jets are chasing points, and this Bills secondary has been middle of the pack this season. So Devontae Adams weekly now is putting up big numbers, and I know Garrett Wilson, he's not happy about that, where Adams was supposed to be number 2 wide receiver, but right now Adams is taking over as the number 1 wide receiver with targets, touchdowns, and fantasy points. So he's a start. Garrett Wilson, I still think is a start. One of the more talented wide receivers in all the league, and even with Adams getting a lot of the work and targets, he's still putting up good numbers as Wilson. He's a start. Khalil Shakir, the only wide receiver weekly I trust on this Buffalo Bill team. and the number one option, even though last week it was a down game for this Bill offense overall besides James Cook. Josh Allen didn't have a good game. Shakir didn't have a good game. But this week versus the New York Jets secondary, that can't stop anyone. He's a start. Amari Cooper, Keon Coleman, Curtis Samuel, Will sits for me. These wide receivers, they just haven't been consistent all season long. And Amari Cooper, maybe his best days are behind him because it don't take 5-6 weeks now to get up on the playbook. So this week, they were all easy sit. Indianapolis Colts at the New York Giants. Josh Downs, he's a start. Easily the number one wide receiver on the Indianapolis Colts roster. And he goes out there and he makes plays. And him and Anthony Richardson, I know the rapport isn't all that great, but still the number one wide receiver in Indianapolis, making plays for the majority of the season. And he's a start. Michael Pittman is sit. The numbers have been non-existent this season for Michael Pittman. And this offense pretty much is Jonathan Taylor, Josh Downs, and Anthony Richardson running the football. So Pittman with a down season, and last week he didn't do much. He's an easy sit, even in a plus matchup at the Giants. Malik Neighbors, he's a start. 12-15 fantasy points weekly. He still finds a way to put up those numbers as Malik Neighbors. So this Colt defense definitely leaky, definitely beatable. We saw Calvin Ridley go out there, have a good game last week versus defense. And Neighbors, he's a start. Wendell Robinson, he's got 32 targets in the last few weeks for this New York Giant team. And there's a lot of garbage time targets and obviously not a lot of fantasy points putting up. So Wendell Robinson, he should be a wide receiver own. Both team leagues are deeper, but he's not a fantasy option this week. Like I said, the targets have been there, but the fantasy production hasn't been there. So he's a sit this week. It's Green Bay Packers at the Minnesota Vikings. Jaden Reed, he's a start. One of the better yard after catch wide receivers in the league. I know this offense is inconsistent as well, who has a good game week in and week out at the wide receiver position. But Jaden Reed, I have confidence in him. Minnesota, believe it or not, gives up the second most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season, even though they're one of the better defenses in the league. He's a star. Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs. Every week you got to guess which one of these wide receivers are going to go out there and have a good ball game. And if you're not in the deepest of leagues, I just wouldn't take a chance on these wideouts. Like I said, one big game, these guys could have 20 to 25 fantasy points, and then the next week, anywhere from like 2 to 5 fantasy points of this. It's Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, arguably one of the best receiver combos in the league. And this week, a good matchup versus the Green Bay Packers. A division game thing goes, but Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, they're locked in weekly as good wideouts for this Minnesota Viking team and for fantasy owners. And this week, their easy starts: Vegas Raiders at the New Orleans Saints. Jacoby Myers, Brock Bowers, the only players in the passing game that are fantasy options. I know the last couple weeks the numbers have been down for Jacoby Myers, but this week a decent ball game at the New Orleans Saints. Their secondary really hasn't been all that great, and I think Myers could go out there and have a good ball game. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Cedric Wilson, they don't really have fantasy value. This offense obviously is depleted. Derek Carr out, Alvin Kamara out, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed out, Taysom Hill, and it's down pretty much to Valdez-Scantling and Cedric Wilson in the passing game. And obviously I'm not going to trust them in a championship week. Tennessee Titans at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Calvin Ridley is start. He's got a good rapport with Mason Rudolph. We saw early in the season when Rudolph was in there a few ball games, he went out and put up some good performances. And this week at a Jaguar defense that don't stop anyone, he's a start. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, it's either a touchdown or nothing pretty much for him. So he's got 9 touchdowns on 25 catches this season. And I'm not going to roll the dice here and put him in the starting lineup, even with a great matchup at the Jacksonville Jaguars. I don't believe Westbrook-Ikhine could go out there once again and find the end zone. That's pretty much what you're banking on. So he's a sit. Brian Thomas Jr., one of the best receivers in the league. And what a rookie season it's been for him in an offense that's been one of the worst offenses in the league. And we know the banged up Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis, they've been out multiple weeks out for the season. Evan Ingram as well, and Trevor Lawrence. But still with Mac Jones at quarterback, he's going out there and putting up elite numbers. Miami Dolphins at the Cleveland Browns. Tyreek Hill's a start. Last week, he could easily have 3 touchdowns. A couple of them he dropped in the end zone. And then the last one, he did score a touchdown in the second half of that game, was Tyreek Hill. So Hill, obviously, his numbers aren't at where they were last season when Toe out of the lineup early in the season. Then a lot of drops this season. They're not 100% with the wrist, but this week in a good matchup at the Browns, he's a start. Jalen Waddle will sit. We don't know if he's going to return in this game, but one way or the other, he's still going to be a sit for me as Jalen Waddle. It's been a down season once again for Waddle. Drop passes, not running crisp routes, not getting open. And this week, even in a plus matchup at the Browns, he's a sit. Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore, this sits for me. Last week, both these wide receivers really couldn't do much in a great matchup at Cincinnati. And I said this in last week's videos, with Jameis Winston out of the lineup, everyone's fantasy value takes a hit. With Jerry Jeudy, was one of the best wide receivers in fantasy football for many weeks. But now, with Thompson Robinson in the lineup, he's a sit. I can't trust him. And Elijah Moore, the same thing. Dallas Cowboys at the Eagles. CeeDee Lamb, he's a start. Him and Cooper Rush have a great rapport. And CeeDee Lamb, even with Cooper Rush in there, quarterback now, over the last 6-7 weeks, he's still going out there putting up elite numbers as CeeDee Lamb, one of the best wide receivers in all pro football. And right now, he's actually lived up to the bill as a 4th, 5th pick overall in most fantasy drafts. He's a start. Brandon Cooks, Jalen Tolbert, their sits. Cooks has had a couple decent games since he returned from injury, but he's not a wide receiver with enough volume or targets to trust. And Jalen Tolbert, he did find the end zone last week. He's been a solid wide receiver for the most part this season, but just not enough volume and not enough, obviously, targets, and also a tough matchup at a good Eagle defense. So their sits. A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, they're locked in weekly as starts. Even if Kenny Pickett's in there, quarterback for this Philadelphia Eagle team, we saw A.J. Brown go out there, have a good ball game after Jalen Hurts left early in that game. So A.J. Brown, another big season it's been for him. He can run all the routes. He's one of the more physical wide receivers in the league. And this Cowboys secondary's been banged up all season. Devonta Smith, we know, is a boom or bust wide receiver, but more weeks than not, a wide receiver that has major upside. And this week, a team versus the Dallas Cowboys, where he's had a lot of success in that division, he's a start. Atlanta Falcons at the Commanders, Drake London, Darnell Mooney are starts. I know London left last week's game with the injury, but he said he would have came back into the game if he had to. And this week, a decent matchup at the Commanders, where their secondary isn't all that great. We saw Philadelphia move the football up and down the field versus defense. I think this week, London and Mooney, they've been a nice 1-2 combo, even with Michael Penix in there, quarterback, or starts. Terry McLaurin, he's a start each and every week. Pretty much the only consistent option in the passing game besides Zach Ertz for this Washington Commander team. Last week found the end zone on a great over-the-shoulder catch. Him and Jaden Daniels, they're locked in. And this Commander team's locked in right now with a big win last week, so he's an easy start. Detroit Lions at the 49ers, final game of the week. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamison Williams, they start each and every week. St. Brown having another monster season, 100 catches, 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns, once again on the board. He's an easy start. Jamison Williams, big deep ball threat, could run all the routes as well. He's been great in his 3rd season in the NFL. He's an easy start. Deebo Samuel, Jawan Jennings, they're flex options for me. Deebo, I know last week had a good game, but besides that, he really hasn't done much. Let's be honest, all season long is Deebo Samuel, so we know he's getting some reps at running back. Correndo, there is a possibility he could return in this game where he's more of a physical back and an every downs back than a Patrick Taylor. But like I said, Deebo really hasn't put up the numbers this season, and even in a championship game, I can't 100% trust him. He's a flex option. And same with Jawan Jennings. He had a few good weeks in a row, but the last 2 weeks, his numbers have come back down. Is Jawan Jennings. Defenses are zeroing in on Jennings a little bit more. So I know this game could be high scoring between these two teams, but going off the last few weeks and with Deebo Samuel most of the season, they're flex options. That's wide receivers start sit every matchup for championship week, week 17 of the fantasy football season.